Hello again, and welcome to episode 6 of Stucky's Travels.
Today we're going to talk about Colorado, and even though we're only going to spend 15 minutes talking about it, we could probably make 3 or 4 videos about Colorado. It's a really beautiful state. There's 10 properties that the National Park system runs, so don't forget your passport with all the information about the parks inside, so you can get all of your passport stamps. So on this map you can see there's a few different ways you could approach Colorado. One way is to fly into Denver and use Denver as your base camp and do day trips.
A lot of rental cars are fairly cheap out of Denver.
Another thing you could do is start in Denver and then fly home from another city like Salt Lake City, for example. So when you start in Denver, Denver's known as the Mile High City, and there's lots of different things around the city to remind you that the town is 5,280 feet or more high.
Yep. Including on the stairs of the Capitol building, that's where that plaque was showing you that as you're walking up to the Capitol building, you're a mile high.
Also in the Colorado Rockies baseball stadium, there's a row of seats that's a different color than all the other seats, and that row of seats is exactly 1 mile high. So half the stadium's less than a mile high, and the other half of the stadium's more than a mile high.
Nice thing about Colorado is even though it's high in the mountains, at least the western part of the state, it's fairly sunny most of the year.
So welcome to colorful Colorado. So one of the outskirts of Denver is called Golden, Colorado, and there's a lot of different things to explore, including Lookout Mountain, which has the gravesite of Buffalo Bill Cody.
And the Coors Brewing Factory, where you can sample different beers.
Also, in Golden, Colorado is the Colorado School for the Mines, and 24 miles of trails, including the Triceratops trails, where you can find dinosaur footprints.
Like this one. Or these ones, I should say.
The picture on the right has Miles trying to surf because that's a fossil structure known as ripple marks, sedimentary rock.
Yep. And even though for the most part they disappear if they're covered in sandstone very, very shortly after made, and then become sedimentary rock, then they'll actually stay and form this way during drought periods.
As you can tell, rocks are my thing. I like geology.
Yep.
Miles, not so much.
Yep. I just like surfing.
So another thing that you can do when you leave Denver is travel west along I-70. The mountains, the interstate's sort of in the valley between the mountains, and so to your left and your right are beautiful scenes the whole way.
Yep. And there's a lot of old mining towns that try to keep their historic value and look to them, which is very neat to drive through, and a lot of little shops along the way. A lot of people visit them.
And we'll show you more of those later.
There are lots of large trees.
So north of Denver, about an hour and a half north, is Fort Collins, maybe a little less than an hour and a half depending on where you're staying in Denver. And one of the kind of neat little places to stop is called the Sweatsville Zoo. The owner created 180 of these different art pieces out of old car parts. So a neat place to stop. Right now, the property is actually for sale, so hopefully the person who buys it will keep these pieces.
Yep. And for those of you who are runners, the high school girls team from Fort Collins actually won a national championship about 5 years ago or more.
So as you are going north of Denver, again about an hour, hour and a half, you'll enter the town of Estes Park, which is the home of Rocky Mountain National Park. You can start to see the Rockies in the background.
Yep. And if you're driving into Colorado from the east, usually about an hour outside of Denver, hour and a half, you start to see the mountain ranges in the distance after a long long stretch of just flat Kansas or Nebraska and half of Colorado.
So one of the wildlife species that you might see as you're approaching Estes Park area and Rocky Mountain National Park are the bighorn sheep.
And even though it looks like their eyes are glowing, they're not. So, but bighorn sheep, the males will actually buck horns with each other for dominance and for mating. And so the ones with the largest horns, sometimes they'll butt heads for hours trying to show dominance. And the one that's got the largest horns, the most dominant male, will usually end up with most of the females in the area.
And those horns can weigh as much as 30 pounds.
That's a lot.
So you can see that we're right here in town. There's buildings in the background, and there was just an elk standing right there. We were actually able to get fairly close. You know, you should never get super close to wildlife because it is wild, but we were able to get maybe 25, 30 feet away from the elk. As you can see, really large horns. During the time period each year where the antlers are growing, they can grow as much as 1 inch per day.
Yep. And Estes Park, besides the wildlife that might be walking through town, has lots and lots of shopping for those of you who like to shop. So,
One of the things Estes Park is also known for is the Stanley Hotel.
which is really famous for the movie The Shining.
And then finally, you enter Rocky Mountain National Park itself. A lot of great hiking, great roads to travel on, and really amazing viewpoints.
And don't forget, have your passport book ready.
So I think one of the things I was most surprised by with this national park was just the abundance of wildlife. When you think about American national parks, you always think of Yellowstone as having a lot of wildlife, but I really didn't know that there could be that much wildlife in Rocky Mountain National Park as well. There were times where we could see as many as 50 elk at one spot.
Yep, and some elk will actually travel through the Colorado mountains, the Rockies, in herds of 200, 300, or even more. So
As you can see, it's very high elevation. Some people actually struggle with this and have elevation sickness or altitude sickness. It kind of gives you a headache. You might feel lightheaded or dizzy. There is some different things that you can try to take to help with that, but it really is not a pleasurable experience for the people who suffer from that.
yeah, and at some times of the year, certain times, when you're up in this elevation looking at a view like this, the cloud layer is actually below where you are. And so instead of seeing all this green, all you see is just the top of the clouds. It's very neat.
So this is a pika,
Yep, and the pike is related to rabbits.
just a lot smaller ears. They're found in mountainous areas of Asia and North America.
Yeah, and while hiking through the mountains, they sound like little tiny birds. They do this little chirping noise. You can hear them from really far away, but they're really, really tiny.
So as you can see, the Rocky Mountains are just huge. For people who live in the east, you might have gone to the Smoky Mountains or part of the Appalachians. The Appalachians are much older than the Rockies, so they've had a lot more time to erode, whereas the Rocky Mountains are younger, so they're a lot more sharp and jagged. So this is one of the trails that we did in Colorado. We came to a lake with a really nice view. The Colorado State Quarter is sort of mimicked after just the Rocky Mountains in general. Some people say this is the location of where the coin was from, but when you look up the Colorado State Quarter, it's just talking about the Rocky Mountains in general.
And a lot of the year they are covered in snow, but not always. I think we went there over fall break at this time, and so it was late October, mid-October, so snow is already starting to form at the higher elevations.
So we could make a snowman.
Yeah. Whereas on the right side, you can see, depending on the season and depending on where you're at in the elevation, the color is very different. So
So this was taken earlier in the year. So another trip to Colorado. So more like in July instead of October.
Yep. And there's tons of hiking in Colorado. A lot of people will hike the Colorado Trail, the Rocky Mountain National Trail, a lot of different trails, and it's just beautiful scenery the whole time. There is risk, obviously, of thunderstorms if you're at higher elevation, of getting struck by lightning. But as long as you know what the weather is ahead of time, you're staying at lower elevation. If there is a storm, for the most part, you're pretty safe. So these lakes are nice, but they are very cold if you jump in them. So
So mountain goats are another species, depending on where you are, that you might come across in Colorado.
they are much larger than they look.
A lot of beautiful wildflowers earlier in the year. This is one of the long trails that Miles was referring to, the Continental Divide Trail. You can see how long it spans.
Yeah, and everything that rains to the east will actually drain out into the Mississippi River eventually, and eventually the Atlantic Ocean, and everything that rains to the west will eventually end up in the Pacific Ocean.
So another spot where you need your national park passport is the Great Sand Dunes National Park.
Yep. And it's called it because a lot of sand.
It's because when the wind blows, the mountains actually trap the sand there, and over time, the sediments were deposited there. So those little quaint towns along I-70 in the mountain valleys that Miles was referring to, here's one of those pictures. A lot of neat little mom and pop shops that you can check out. Really neat old buildings along the way. Again, old mining towns. And mining train trestles and train tracks. There's also a bike trail that runs for many, many miles along I-70, so you can safely bike this corridor as well. It is mountainous, however, so difficult biking. Again, beautiful towns. This was the town of Georgetown. Had a lake right outside the town, and you can see how it's sort of nestled in the valley of the mountains. Same area. This is Vail. Vail is known as a very popular ski resort area in the winter, but it's also very beautiful in other times of the year as well. So it's a neat place to stop off, even if you don't spend any money, because it is quite expensive there. You can still walk around and see a lot of beautiful things.
And then besides the national parks, there's also the national monuments. And there's 6 of those in Colorado.
And the national monuments are still run by the National Park System. They typically are just smaller properties overall, which is why they're considered a monument instead of a park oftentimes. Or they might have one structure. For example, like Devil's Tower in Wyoming is an example of a national monument because it's really that one structure that you're going to see. The Colorado National Monument is really a geologist's dream. There's 3 different rock area types that you can see. So we have the sedimentary rock of the sandstone, but there's also the metamorphic rock gneiss. It's spelled Gneiss, but there's always a joke about, look at this nice rock, Nice rock that I found. Miles doesn't think geology jokes are nearly as funny as I do. And then if gneiss undergoes another round of metamorphosis, it becomes schist, and you have to be really careful about how you say that one. So there's some fun rock humor that you can see at this park, and because of the erosion that's taken place over time, it gives you a good opportunity to observe many, many rock layers that show a lot of geologic history.
Schist. That's it. Thank you guys for joining us for Colorado.
Many, many more places in Colorado to explore, but those are just a few highlights. We didn't talk about Colorado Springs, which is where Pikes Peak, over 14,000 feet elevation is. We didn't talk about Pueblo, which is where Miles was born.
Yep.
And so on. So look up more about Colorado for yourself.